I'm very glad to see all of you here. I see a few people that have been to each and every one of these, and I wanted to tell you how impressed I am with your stamina. But for those of you who are here, I appreciate it. And I wanted to thank all of you for being here, but I also wanted to thank the church and Father Dunbar for giving me a chance to present this information. It's obviously something I've been interested in for a long time, and I hope you have found some of this of interest as well. I wanted to start by summarizing in a bit of a different way what we have learned about science. And when I started this, I told you I wanted to talk about four things about science. First, some of the remarkable things that science has done and what we have learned about reality and our place in it. Second, I wanted to be able to demonstrate that science has learned things that it cannot explain. And third, our knowledge based on what science our knowledge based on what science is will always be incomplete. And fourth, science has certain inherent limitations and has nothing to say about some vitally important aspects of our understanding of reality. So let's review and look more broadly at what science is and is not capable of telling us. First, science operates within a sphere of space and time. But let me define what I mean by that. As we've discussed, the great power of science is its ability to discover the way reality really is. And that is really through direct observation and experimentation. If you look at the two great achievements in the 20th century in physics, general relativity and quantum mechanics, both of those were based on direct observations about the way reality actually is, and then confirmed through experimentation. And that's really science at its best. But experimentation is not always possible because you have to control the circumstances in order to do that. And so direct observation is all we have when you're looking out into the universe, for instance. But our ability to directly observe is important when we're looking at the universe because we can observe over very long distances and back in time. We can only see, however, we can only see as far back in time as the speed of light will allow us. Right now, we've been able to see about 13.4 billion light years away, which is 13.4 billion years into the past. That's about 400 million years after the Big Bang, which is about when we believe that galaxies and stars began to form. And that was when we first had light. So we can only see back about that far. We'll never be able to see back to the Big Bang. But we also know that the universe is much larger than what we can see. When we look at a galaxy that is 13.4 billion light years away, you're looking 13.4 billion years into the past, and you're seeing what that galaxy looked like that long ago. And from that time forward, it has been moving away from us, accelerating away from us for 13.4 billion years. So it is very, very far away from us at this point. So the universe is much larger than we can see. And as we also discussed when we were talking about time, we can only see into the past. We cannot see into the future. Now on Earth, we can also see into the past through fossils and now through genetic analysis. But the problem is the fossil record is incomplete. It's relatively small by comparison, and it'll never go back to the beginning of life. So we'll never be able to observe directly how life began on Earth. And with respect to everything that we cannot directly observe, what we're dealing with is the extrapolation of data from things we can see into the past or into the future. And as I said, I think that's an important effort. It's something we should absolutely do and take with great seriousness. But I think we need to be realistic that that's always going to be a theory and it's always going to be unproven. And that's true for the Big Bang, it's true for the origin of life, and it's true for the future of our universe. So second, science deals with the evolution of reality, not its origins or creation. Science is very effective in observing things that are already in existence, their composition, their interactions, and their behavior. But in most cases, science is utterly incapable of determining the origin or creation of things. We talked a lot about the four forces and their particular values, the absolute nature of the speed of light. Science observes these things and accepts them as true, but cannot explain them. Nevertheless, they become articles of faith on which all science is based. But science cannot explain how they came into being. Similarly, science cannot answer some important why questions. Why are we here, and what is our purpose? So third, even within the sphere within which science operates, the information we have is incomplete. We have limited ability to see things at the quantum level, the world at the very small, and while we have very powerful telescopes, the information that we can gain from them is fairly limited. If you look at what we talked about in our own solar system, when Voyager was launched, we didn't know very much about the moons around Jupiter and Neptune. We thought that they were probably like our own moon, which is pretty sterile and inert. But when we went there, we saw on Io around Jupiter that the level of volcanism they have is probably the most in the universe and in the solar system. And when we went to Triton, we saw that they had nitrogen geysers, which we had no idea about. So if we can't tell from the Earth, with the instruments that we have, very much about the solar system, how much more information is out there that we'll never have when we're looking thousands or billions of years into the light years into the far distant universe. When we look at evolution, we think that evolution is likely correct about how more complex creatures develop from simpler ones, but the mechanisms are very much in dispute. We don't really know if it's primarily a struggle survival or a snuggle for survival. We also don't know if the survival is of genes or the organism itself. Also, there are many things that evolution struggles to explain, including the reflective consciousness and the myriad capabilities of man that have little to do with his survival. Something else is needed to explain all we have become. As science progresses and we learn more and more, in most cases, science is not wrong, but incomplete. If you look at Newton's universal laws of motion and gravitation, they are still perfectly valid today as they were when he came up with them, but they're incomplete. Einstein completed our understanding of gravity through general relativity, and when we learned that gravity doesn't operate as a force, but the curvature of space-time in 3 dimensions. We have also spent thousands of years trying to understand the universe, the stars and galaxies that we can see. But now we have learned that this picture is incomplete as well. We now have dark matter and dark energy that make up 95% of the universe, and we have no idea what they are. Fourth, I think we have seen that science has shown us that reality is mysterious and surprising. No one predicted the probabilistic nature of the world of subatomic particles, and even though scientists can model it and predict it with great accuracy, what it looks like and how it is remains mysterious to us. Gravity is not a force, but a curvature of space-time in 3 dimensions. And we also saw that time, which appears to us on a daily basis to be a constant in our lives, is actually different for every person. Finally, science is limited by the capabilities of the human intellect. While our brains are probably the most complex structures we know of in the universe, it has its limitations. We know, and we talked about the fact that we are limited by the cognitive filter that every human being has. Those are the spectacles behind our eyes, and we can't take them off. And as remarkable as our brains are, there are certain inherent capacities that there are certain inherent capabilities of our brains that are limited. We know that a chimpanzee can't send the Hubble telescope into space, and our ability to imagine and process information is similarly limited, but at a different level. We do not even understand ourselves, our problem of consciousness. So we have spent a good bit of time trying to gain a better understanding of science and its limitations. But what role does theology play in our understanding of reality? And for this, I'd like to turn to John Polkinghorne. John Polkinghorne is an English theoretical physicist. He was born in 1930. He studied, for 25 years, he studied elementary particles and contributed to the discovery of the quark, which is a subatomic particle. At the age of 49, he entered seminary, and in 1982, he became an Anglican priest. He is probably now best known for his works about science and religion. He is the author of 7 books on physics and mathematics and 26 books on science and religion. He was knighted in 1997 and was awarded the Templeton Prize for his work on the interface between science and religion in 2002. Polkinghorne refers to himself as a critical realist. He seeks to take the whole of our experience of the world into an account of reality and how the world works. He sees science and theology as the 2 great disciplines that can be used to describe how the world is. Theology and science are both concerned with the understanding and ordering of experience. He is not concerned with nature and supernature, but with one reality. He says when considering a multiverse, he believes that we should recognize the speculations for what they are. They're not physics, but in the strictest sense, metaphysics. Polkinghorne was practicing science for 25 years, and he is well aware of the limitations and biases of scientists that impact the credibility of their work. He says, science is no longer simply the rational observation of clear and definitive results of a clockwork universe. It is a matter of the interpretation of data, and the more complex the phenomena, the more distant the observations or the smaller the subjects, the more data is developed and the less clarity we have about what it is telling us. And I talked in the first talk about the discovery of the Higgs boson. And a team of scientists took reams of data from the particle accelerator. They worked at it for months, and after several months they decided that they had actually seen the Higgs boson. But they were not able to conclude that with absolute certainty, and they couldn't be sure it wasn't something else. He also, as I have quoted many times, believes we cannot take off the spectacles behind their eyes. Even scientists have inherent biases and intellectual limitations. One example he gives is the predisposition toward believing that theories or solutions with mathematical beauty and elegance are likely to be more true. He also recognizes that scientists must strive not only for truth, but for personal reputation and success. And inherently, they can only seek answers where funding is available. Polkinghorne also rejects reductionism as being a complete explanation of the truth and is a believer in the concept of strong emergence. This is what he says. There is a degree of interdependence that exists between the various levels of the hierarchy of science. It is clear that the fitness of an organism for survival in an ecological setting is not an idea that can be usefully transcribed into statements about collections of quarks, gluons, and electrons. Evolution also cannot explain human consciousness and its intellectual and creative abilities, which far surpass any necessity of mere survival. Humans possessing the power of free agency, if true, is the best example of strong emergence. Now, he talks, as you might expect, a lot about theology. And what I have found is that he says it a lot more clearly than I could ever paraphrase it. So if you will bear with me, I'm going to quote fairly liberally from some of what he has written, but I think you'll find it interesting. And the first area I'm going to address is why theology is necessary, why theology is important. In order to understand reality, we need to address all elements of the human experience. Science addresses only what the senses disclose to us, and does it exceedingly well. But there are other aspects of the human experience that require explanation. There is more to the world than physics can ever express. Scientism is the mistaken attempt to exalt science into a complete philosophy. Reality is a multi-layered unit. I can perceive another person as an aggregation of atoms, an open biochemical system in interaction with the environment, a specimen of Homo sapiens, an object of beauty, someone who needs and deserves my respect and compassion, a brother or sister for whom Christ has died. All are true, and all mysteriously go in here in that one person. Theology seeks to explain the source of the rational order and structure which science both assumes and confirms in its investigations of the world. Theology differs from science in many respects because of its very different subject matter. God cannot be put to the test in the way that the impersonal physical world can be subject to experimental inquiry. If there is a God, he is a hidden God. The God of the gaps is dead. In theology, we are concerned with one who transcends us. There is mystery in nature, in the nature of the infinite, which will never be comprehended by the finite, which is us. God is properly understood as the ordainer and guarantor of natural law. His role is to sustain the world. Creation is properly understood as a continuing act of God's will, which maintains the cosmos moment by moment. It is not just about some initiating instant, like the Big Bang. He is the ground of physical process, not a participant in it. The world science describes to me with its order, intelligibility, potentiality, and tightly knit character is one consonant with the idea that it is the expression of the will of a creator, subtle, patient, and content to achieve his purposes by the slow unfolding of process inherent in those laws of nature which, in their regularity, are but pale reflections of his abiding faithfulness. If the organization of matter can reach such a stage that it gives rise to capacity to attain knowledge of itself, there is no particular difficulty in supposing it is also capable of obtaining knowledge of God. Our evolved capacity to respond to our Creator is the highest and most striking illustration of that potentiality with which the physical world has been endowed. We have already noted that the scientific view of the world is full of surprises. If we cannot foretell what we should find when we enter a new physical regime, like the quantum world, it is to be anticipated that our encounter with God will not always accord with our prior expectation. Take that. There is an authenticity and richness in human life that demands that we take all of our experiences with the utmost seriousness, respecting the multidimensional way in which it presents itself to us. Any metaphysical worldview that did not seek to take reality on reality's terms would be unacceptable. Modern science seems almost irresistibly to point beyond itself. In following are some comments that he has made about theology as a discipline. Theology, like science, is corrigible. The activities of the theologian are as fallible and his theories as correctable as those of any scientist and any scientific theories. Scientific theories which consistently work are likely to do so because they represent with some degree of verisimilitude the structure of the physical world. Theology will only have power if it too mirrors reality. One of the strongest indicators of the validity of the claim that religion is in touch with reality is provided in the universal character of mystical experience, understood as the experience of unity with the ground of all. It is to be found as an element in all the world's religions. Dogmas of religion are attempts to formulate in precise terms the truths disclosed to the religious experience of mankind in exactly the same way that the dogmas of physical science are attempts to formulate in precise terms the truths discovered by the sense perceptions of mankind. It is clear that science has not demonstrated the causal closure of the natural world. Nothing it can tell us requires us to deny our directly experienced human capacity for intentional action. Nor can science forbid religious believers to hold their belief in God's providential interaction with the history of the world. Theology, not science, can lay just claim to be the true theory of everything. So we have spent a good bit of time talking about what science can and cannot tell us about reality, but I want to spend the rest of my time here talking about the reality of our own lives. Science deals almost exclusively with our understanding of and our interaction with the external world. But the reality of how we actually live our lives is not based on the external world. Instead, the experience of our lives is almost entirely subjective. I've always been fascinated by a concept that each of us has a bubble of our lives which represent who we are as human beings. And in this bubble are all of our qualia, which, as you'll recall, are our subjective experiences of our senses, our memories, our experiences, our personal relationships, our talents, our joys, our fears, our hopes for the future, our successes, and our humiliations. Each person's bubble is completely unique, and it is with us wherever we go. Science has nothing to say about this subjective experience of our lives. But I'm also struck by what is most important in our lives. We believe, as deeply as we believe anything else, that our lives have meaning, as do the lives of those people we care about. The most important things for most of us are our relationship with our family and friends, and we live our lives substantially on this basis and with this focus. Love, for most of us, is the primary driver of how we live our lives. We also have a deep and abiding moral sense, a very similar moral sense to that of most other human beings across religions and cultures. So we know these things, we believe them as firmly as any scientific theory or conclusion, and perhaps more so. And these are the things that primarily drive our lives. But where do they come from? Why are they so consistently the driving force in the lives of every human being? Are they in fact nothing more than vibrations of particles? Are they simply the result of evolution or something more? These are difficult questions, but I do think that we have the opportunity to make decisions about the ultimate nature of reality. And no person, no theologian, no philosopher, no scientist can make that decision for you. Each of us is responsible for the course of our own life. Now, you can argue about the existence, the nature, or extent of free will, but the reality is we make decisions every day that affect our lives in important ways. And we make almost all of those decisions based on incomplete information. So if you think about someone who makes a decision to move to a new city where they've never been, take a new job with a company they've never worked for, think about how little you actually know when you make that decision. You don't really know what the job's going to be like. You don't know who your friends are going to be. You don't know where you'll live. And you don't know what's going to happen to you while you're there. I mean, you could be in a terrible accident, but you might find someone that you want to marry. The same is true, but nevertheless, we make that decision, we make that commitment, and it has a major impact on the course of our lives. The same is true about many other decisions that we make in our lives, including whom to marry. For those of us who have been married for a long time, if you look back, it would have been very hard to predict how your life would actually turn out. And in fact, who you will have become as individuals, because all of us change over 30 or 40 years. And I will tell you, I make a decision every day to recommit myself to my wife and my marriage. But I can tell you, after 39 years, that is clearly a decision based on incomplete information. For me, when I began to struggle with these issues as an adult, I recognized that Christianity and its tenets, its kenotic ethic, deeply resonated with me as the way I wanted to live my life. But I struggled with the fact that science had crowded out any space for God in my understanding of reality. So I began to learn about science, and I focused primarily on physics, because physics is the most fundamental of the sciences. And it deals with the structure and operation of reality at the most basic level. And in that process of learning about science, I learned a lot of things that fascinated me, but I also learned about the limitations of science And in effect, for me, it created space for God. But more than that, I came to the conclusion that God provided the most elegant and therefore likely correct answer to many of the most important questions in my life and many of the questions that human beings have been asking for many years. I believe that we all have a tendency to drift along through life without really dealing with these questions. We are busy with jobs, with children, with our hobbies and habits, and thinking about issues of the ultimate reality tends to take a back seat, I think, for all of us. And I think it's because it's hard, it takes time, and it takes some real effort. But I also believe that one of the main reasons we don't do it is because we're very comfortable where we are in our lives and how our lives are going. And we don't really want to face the possibility of change. But as Aristotle said, which I firmly believe, a life unexamined is not worth living. So this, I think, is a challenge and opportunity for all of us to learn as much as we can from all sources available to us, including science, but also to listen to our own tuition and to what we hold dear in our lives. As Polkinghorne would say, taking into account the whole of our experience. And as he's also said, I believe in quarks, but the acknowledgement of their existence does not touch or threaten me in my own being. It is very different with a belief in God, which has consequences for all I do and all I hope for. If you're already willing to live a life that is based on a deep sense of morality, on the love of your family and friends, and on the deep meaning that those things have for us, why would you ignore these elements as important constructs of your understanding of the nature of reality? To those who are already Christians or otherwise faithful believers in God, I would say that science is not at war with religion. Don't ignore what science has to tell you about reality, but learn as much as you can and embrace it. Will this present some challenges with biblical interpretation? It may, but there are plenty of issues with biblical interpretation without science. And if you believe in God as I do, the more we can understand about the wonder of His creation, the more we can appreciate what He has done. And I would also tell you, don't be afraid to bring the highest level of scrutiny and challenge to this exercise. If He is real, and He is who we believe He is, I assure you He can take it. I believe that the physical laws and processes that science uncovers are the laws and processes by which He has created and continues to create the physical reality. For me, perhaps more acutely now as a grandfather than ever before, the little we know about science, about how a new life is created in the womb, in no way minimizes the miracle of that creation. For others who have not made a decision about the ultimate reality, your challenge and opportunity is also to learn all you can about reality from all sources and make a proactive decision for yourself. But you must recognize that science will not have all the answers, and there will be something else would be needed to fill that gap. Whatever it is, it's real. The four forces are real. Whatever caused them to come into existence is real. Whatever your decision, in many ways, for all its complexities, that's the easy part. Living your life in accordance with that decision can be quite challenging. If you're a reductionist and you believe that your deep sense of morality, the important decisions that you make about your life, and the love you have for your spouse, your children, your parents, your grandchildren, are nothing more than the result of vibrations of particles and evolution, then this logically means that your life and the lives of all the people you care about are meaningless. And I would also argue that simply developing your own relativistic sense of morality and meaning would also be an illusion. And I can tell you, I do not have sufficient courage to live that life. So I have made a decision. I believe in an eternal, omnipotent, and infinite God. And in my case, the Christian God. I believe that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, whose service is perfect freedom. That's my choice, and that's my belief about what is true. But I can tell you, living that life, the life that He prescribes for me, is far more complex and difficult than making that decisions. Do I have doubts? Absolutely. But I would have doubts about any decision that I made about the ultimate reality, because the information that we need to make that decision is not readily available to us, certainly in the sense that science uses through observation and experimentation. And frankly, I don't know how anyone's decision about the ultimate reality could be held without some doubt about whether that belief is right. So my mantra has become to embrace the mystery. There's clearly a great deal of mystery about belief in God and about the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus, but I would assert no more than quantum mechanics. One of the things that science has done is to demonstrate the surprising and mysterious nature of the universe. You simply cannot make this stuff up. My challenge to you, if you have not done so, is to make a decision based on all the information available to you, and then have the courage to live your life in accordance with that decision. My decision about reality has aligned my understanding of science, the aspects of reality that science cannot address, and the beliefs that I hold, the deepest beliefs that I hold as a human being about morality, love, and the meaningfulness of life. Is it mysterious? You bet. But striving to live my life in accordance with my most deeply held beliefs is both the greatest challenge and the greatest joy I could ever have. And I encourage you to join me in that quest. Thank you.
I think I speak for everyone here. Our gratitude to Jon for these wonderful talks. He's a great gift for lucid exposition and has been fully exhibited. I've heard some of you speaking about being introduced to ideas of dizzying impact, and as of course the point is they are dizzying, they're inherently dizzying, and yet Jon has kept us from getting lost amid these wonders and mysteries of the physical universe. And I have to say, after these talks, I'm always full of ideas, and so the good parishioners of St. John's can expect to, suffer many parish papers that have been provoked by this. Some of you, earlier talks, expressed the desire to hear Jon develop more explicit religious or theological dimension to the ideas he's been developing, and perhaps I think you got some of that this evening. And yet, the wonderful thing he was doing is really clearing out a lot of debris that would prevent a clear thinking about the right relation of science and religion. We live at a time when a kind of discredited historical narrative about the inevitable conflict of science and religion is widely taken for granted and very surprisingly on both sides of the debate in their own way. It's portrayed as some sort of mutually exclusive death struggle in which only one truth will survive. And so that's historically discredited, but Jon has also indicated here that the most positive, appreciative exploration of scientific achievement exhibits the fact that it is not a universal account of all reality, and cannot be that. The impression I've got just through these talks is the more science discovered, the more mysterious and inexplicable the universe has become. So far from that kind of late 19th century confidence where it was thought that somehow in a few years we'd have everything taped, right? We know everything. There would be no secrets left. We've discovered in the last century or so that the secrets have been multiplying far beyond our capacity to explain them. That and other ideas that Jon has developed has really made clear that if we're going to think about the existence of God, faith in God, that we really can do so on properly religious or philosophical grounds. The question of science is not going to determine the answer to that question. If we adopt an atheistic perspective, We do so on properly philosophical or so to speak, religious grounds. If we adopt a religious or Christian perspective, we're going to do, again, on religious and philosophical grounds. And this is a wonderful liberation for both science and religion from a really pointless and futile struggle. These talks also illustrate something important, important to me, important to many of you here, which is something about our approach as a parish at St. John's. As I say, in our culture, we sometimes have a highly polarized view of the relation of scientific truth and religious truth. I hope that at St. John's we take our religion adequately, with adequate seriousness. It's revealed and supernatural character. Which is to say that the authority of Scripture is the Word of God, or the reality of the resurrection, or the divinity of Christ. These are not metaphors for some sort of figments of our imagination. At the same time, we acknowledge that the Christian religion itself inherently and historically requires the use of reason to understand, apply, defend, and commend the truth that's been revealed. We also acknowledge that the truth of Revelation leaves room for, indeed, as I'm going to touch on in a future parish paper in a critical way, as an indispensable support for modern natural science. That the truth of Revelation leaves room for the full development of this inquiry into the reality of the natural world by scientific method. Science and religion, reason and revelation, rightly understood, are not mutually exclusive or intrinsically competing and conflicting sources of knowledge. Both are necessary to a complete knowledge of reality. So many of you are parishioners, some of you are not. If you're not, that's a little taste of what you might find at St. John's. We talk about quantum physics roughly every other sermon. And if that approach, broadly speaking, if that approach to thinking about such questions or inquiring into reality intrigues you, do investigate us more. We'd love to have you do that. And so, second round of thanks to Jon. I suppose there might be some questions. Come back to the mic, sir.
I mean, if there are, I'll be glad to try to answer any of them. Yes?
You mentioned that John Polkinghorne has 26 plus awesome books about theology and science.
He does.
I was wondering if there's anyone that you would particularly recommend if we're trying to sort of reach out to a friend who's all about science but not all that open to religion.
The book that one of the books I've recommended is One Reality. I can't remember the subtext, but I think it's One Reality, which presents his views, I think, most directly and most simply. And then there are a lot of other books on various topics, but that's a pretty direct.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, thank you all for coming. Please enjoy the wine and snacks.